Tensions are rising between China and the United States over the South China Sea. Hello, I'm Nathan King in Washington, D.C., and this is The Heat. Rising tensions between China and the US over the South China Sea have some military experts worried the situation could become volatile. The United States says it has every right to fly surveillance flights over what it says are international waters. China says it has every right to build artificial islands on land and reefs that it rightly controls. Amid these tensions, Beijing released its first defense white paper this week, outlining China's military strategy. It says Beijing will not attack unless it is attacked, but, quote, will surely counterattack if attacked. Joining us with the latest is our correspondent from Washington, D.C., Roee Ruttenberg, and our Beijing correspondent, Han Bin. Han Bin, to you first. You have a lot of experience covering the South China Sea, all the way from Hainan Island down to the Nansha Islands. What's the latest from Beijing on these escalating tensions?
Hi. China has criticized the U.S. for stirring up the waters in the South China Sea by acting irresponsibly. It also says the U.S. meddling in the South China Sea is unjustified, unprofitable, harmful to regional stability, and dangerous to bilateral relations. While the U.S. criticized China as destabilizing efforts for the regional peace, China rejected that, saying such provocative statements would do nothing to ease tensions. As for the spy plane incident, the U.S. actions have raised tensions in the region and affected Sino-U.S. ties. In regard to China's island construction, the government says it's within its sovereignty and wants to facilitate better marine search and rescue, disaster relief, and navigation safety. China also hopes to improve the living standards of residents on the islands. The U.S. has kept silent on the activities conducted by other countries, but criticizes China for doing the same. Many say Washington has played a double standard on China's legitimate rights. It's no secret that China is speeding up island construction in the South China Sea, and nothing can change the determination. If the U.S. target is to stop it, confrontation will be inevitable.
Thanks to Roee. Now, what's the U.S. position on all this? Because before they've always said that they'd be neutral over territorial claims in the South China Sea, and this looks like, to some in Beijing, that they're picking sides.
Indeed, and in recent years, the administration has been relatively quiet over such disputes, saying that they prefer the involved parties to solve them on their own. But now, given what the U.S. sees as China's increased action, we have heard a lot more vocal criticism coming from Washington. And I should point out, from Hawaii, the U.S. Defense Secretary Ash Carter was there for the transfer of power at U.S. Pacific Command, and he used some tough language. He said the U.S. would maintain the right to fly over what it considers to be international waters whenever it wants to. He also said that that he called on China to stop any militarization of disputed area, and he said, ironically, that China's actions are actually strengthening the U.S. position in the South China Sea and indeed in the Asia-Pacific region by bringing together all of these countries that are concerned about China's activities. The man who he was overseeing his new appointment, the new head of U.S. Pacific Command, called China's actions preposterous. So some very tough language. Now, earlier in the week, the U.S. Vice President Joe Biden was speaking at a graduation ceremony at the Naval Academy, one of the U.S.'s prestigious military institutions, collegiate institutions, and he reaffirmed the U.S.'s position that it intends to have 60% of naval forces based in the Asia-Pacific by 2020, telling them that these are the situations that you may be encountering. He, too, called on China to calm down, to halt its actions. And we have been hearing from a former U.S. Pacific Command head, Admiral Dennis Blair, who said he's been advising the U.S. government to calm some of its rhetoric, to calm some of its calls for military action or possible military action, and instead encourage the various parties with or without China to resolve this in an international tribunal, but by taking China's considerations into account as they do so. That is the position that he's been pushing on Washington as he's trying to calm what he says, he called this a whack-a-mole situation, that game where you basically whack one mole at a time. He said that is what this current administration is doing. So some very tough talk coming from officials here at the White House, but also a response coming from those who have been in this position calling for a more calculated response of dialogue.
Roee, thanks so much for watching. I just want to go back to Han Bin because the US has always called for transparency. And this week, China released its defense white paper, actually outlining priorities for China, cyber, space, other areas as well. What does it have to say about what's going on in the South China Sea?
Well, the defense spokesman says the timing of the paper has nothing to do with the current tensions in the South China Sea. Yet many believe the strategy will have far-reaching impact on the regional stability and security. In some ways, the white paper expresses China assertively protecting its national interests, especially in military strategy. The country is facing growing challenges. China's concerns come from areas like the US pivots to Asia, Japan's proactive defense policy, marine disputes, as well as the space and cyber security and so on. Chinese leaders said the best direction for military development is to take more active approach. They say the building a stronger army is not only to win the war, but to effectively deter potential threats and avoid confrontations. Based on that thinking, the military will be undergoing deep transformation. Its land forces will have more flexibility, and naval forces will be shifting to a combination of the offshore waters defense with the open seas protection, a multi-functional marine combat force structure. The air focus is on both the sky and also the space, and its strategic nuclear forces will strengthen its information technology. Leaders in Beijing have called for enhancing the military's capabilities to prepare it for a win in the event of conflict. However, the real impact to China's army and the regional security is still waiting to be seen.
Han Bin in Beijing, thank you very much. Roee Ruttenberg here in Washington too, thank you so much. Joining